take a few minutes, so thank you for your patience. We will begin with the hearing on Senate Bill 363. We will open with an overview from our reviser, David Weiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee. Senate Bill 363 concerns several adjustments and amendments to the public assistance eligibility requirements, mostly with the food assistance or SNAP and medical assistance or Medicaid, but there are a few others that are overarching to all public assistance programs. A lot of this is in response to the federal action, even the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed by Congress last summer. Has a lot to do with what's in 363. So there are going to be 3 new sections of law. The first section, this might be familiar to the committee if you remember Senate Bill 85. This is sort of a pared-down version of Senate Bill 85. Requires the Secretary for Children and Families and the Secretary for Health and Environment to verify eligibility for food assistance and medical assistance programs by entering into data matching agreements with state agencies to compare that data for individuals, households who are applying for food or medical assistance. Each secretary shall receive and review information concerning individuals or households applying for or that are currently enrolled in the food and medical assistance programs that may affect eligibility. And then so on a monthly basis, they would get that data from the Office of Vital Statistics, including but not limited to death records, on a quarterly basis from Department of Revenue, and employment and wage information on a monthly basis, potential changes in residency identified by any out-of-state electronic benefit transactions, quarterly basis from the Department of Revenue for potential change in income, wages, residency that are in tax records, on a monthly basis from the Department of Corrections for incarceration status, semi-monthly from Department of Labor, again for potential changes in employment, income, or assets. Then on a monthly basis from the Kansas Lottery and Kansas Racing Gaming Commission to identify any potential lottery or gambling winnings of $3,000 or greater. And then if any instance where an enrollee is determined to be non-compliant with requirements or ineligible for those assistance, the enrollee would be provided a 30-day notice prior to disenrollment. Section 2 is also a new section of law. This would begin on and after January 1, 2027. This matches with the date in the federal Act, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, for the Department of Health and Environment, KDHE, to submit medical assistance enrollment data to the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services on a monthly basis and remove individuals who are enrolled in medical assistance programs in multiple states. KDHE shall also submit enrollee address information that's collected either from a mail return to the department by the U.S. Postal Service, the National Change of Address database maintained by the USPS, if they have information from a managed care organization, prepaid inpatient health plan, or prepaid ambulatory health plan, has a contract with the state, if such address information was provided directly from or verified with the enrollee, or they can also utilize any other data source identified by the department that's approved by the federal government, the federal department of. So that should be Federal Health and Human Services. That's a typo in there, but so the new Section 3 prohibits state agencies from providing an optional exemption, geographic waiver, or work requirements waiver from any public assistance program unless the legislature expressly consents to and approves of such exemption or waiver. This is sort of a similar kind of language that was in, remember, Senate Bill. The Senate substitute for House Bill 2240 from last year. It's the same thing, kind of having that legislative approval before any changes could be made by state agency. And then Section 4 of the bill, this is where we get into the amendments to existing law, KSA 39709. This is the general, the statute providing eligibility requirements for public assistance programs, including TANF, food assistance, child care subsidy, and medical assistance. So in the statute, the bill will amend the statute to adjust the threshold amount for lottery prizes, triggering reports from the Department of Administration to the Department for Children and Families. It's currently 5,000 and reduces that down to 3,000. Just that would match with, you go back to section, the new section 1A7 amount, so 3,000, 3,000. It would then also prohibit DCF and KDHE from accepting self-attestation of income, residency, age, household composition, caretaker relative status, or receipt of other coverage without verification prior to enrollment. Or it also prohibits any authority to waive or decline or periodically check any available income-related data sources to verify eligibility for public assistance programs. So those are all kind of overarching for all public assistance programs. There are also specific amendments in the statute for food assistance or the SNAP benefits. It increases the age of able-bodied adults without dependents through the age of 64 and requires those dependents to then be under the age of 14. That is part of the federal legislation from last year, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So that's just aligning the state ages with what's in federal law now. Prohibits any exemption for time-limited food assistance for homeless individuals, veterans, or individuals who are 24 years of age or younger who had aged out of foster care. Again, that's part of the kind of aligning with the federal law now. Then also requires redeterminations of an individual's eligibility for medical assistance be conducted on a quarterly basis. So this would be for Medicaid. That'd be redeterminations quarterly. Then it also limits on and after January 1, 2027, and that's when the federal law kicks in as well, January 1, 2027, retroactive enrollment and medical assistance to the 2 months prior to the month in which the recipient made in the application for assistance. So they can only look back 2 months from application. And then also requires eligibility of an individual for medical assistance be verified against a master death file on a quarterly basis to ensure that there are not deceased individuals still enrolled in Medicaid. Upon confirmation of death of the individual, the enrollment in medical assistance would be terminated immediately. And the overall bill does take effect on July 1, 2026. Again, there are a few provisions there that are delayed until January 1, 2027 to align with the federal dates as well. And with that, Madam Chair, I can stand for any questions.
Thank you for that explanation. Questions for the reviser? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the questions that just hit me was under Section 4 on paragraph 1. They talk about the winnings reduce those from 5,000 down to 3,000. But is there a list that we get from the lottery that says people have lost this amount of money?
David?
And Chair, Senator, I'm not sure if they provide a list of losses. I think on this, what's in here is just those that claim a prize in excess of that amount. So I don't know if that is.
My concern there would be a loss of to a family of somebody losing $3,000 or $5,000, whatever that number is. It's significant, and that might cause that child to be eligible for assistance, for food. So that's just a thought that hit me while you were reading it. Thank you.
Any other questions for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you so much, David. We will now move to proponent testimony, and we will begin with Caitlin Finley, visiting fellow from the Foundation for Government Accountability. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Okay, I'm pretty short, so if this is good, I can see you all. So again, thank you for letting me be here, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm here to speak in support of Senate Bill 363. As the chair mentioned, my name is Caitlin Finley. I'm with FGA Action. We're a nonprofit group that has a clear mission to improve American lives through the miracle of work. So let me start for this bill with something we're all hearing about nonstop right now: fraud and abuse in our welfare programs. This problem is getting real attention in the media, as we all know, for good reason. When we don't trust the system that it's being run carefully, the first people who pay the price are the people who truly need help from these systems. And that's why I'm in strong support of this bill. We know, of course, every dollar lost to welfare fraud or administrative error is a dollar taken away from the Kansans who are actually eligible and in need of support. The best way to protect the safety net is simple: verify eligibility always, keep records current, and stop payments when someone is no longer eligible. All common sense ideas. So this bill does several practical things that Kansans expect their government to do anyway. Some of things are being done. It's just great to codify them. I'll mention 3 things. So first, this bill requires real data matching across agencies, regular checks with death records, wage, employment records. If someone has moved out of our state, got a better job, went to prison, or unfortunately passed away even, the system should catch that quickly. Monthly and quarterly matches isn't punitive, it's basic stewardship. And second, this bill takes on a major weakness in any benefit systems, allowing self-attestation without verification. Most applicants we know are honest, of course, but if the rules allow a trust me system when they're answering things like how much money they make, if they live here, how many people are in the household, all things that affect if someone's eligible or not, that can invite abuse and bad headlines that we've seen in the past few months. Verification protects the honest applicants from being lumped in with the bad actors, and it protects the programs from being drained. Third, this bill expands the work requirements in the food stamps program. Now, under the One Big Beautiful Bill, able-bodied adults under 64 will be required to work, train, or volunteer just part-time, 20 hours a week to keep their benefits. And it's really important here, this requirement doesn't apply to those who are disabled, seniors, those who are pregnant, or even those going through a rehabilitation program, for instance. So those are some of the bill highlights and mechanics. Now I just want to be very clear on the why about this really important bill. Supporting this bill is not about taking away help from vulnerable Kansans. It's actually about protecting them. Because when program integrity breaks down, the consequences are real. You guys all are very familiar with budget cuts, and with that comes possible tighter eligibility across the board for all, and less public support generally for the very programs that we're talking about today and that people depend on. And right now, another big factor, the state's budget is on the line. With some new accountability measures coming down from the One Big Beautiful Bill, Kansas could be exposed to hundreds of millions of dollars in federal penalties due to your state's error rates in your Medicaid and SNAP programs right now. So that's real money, and it could come straight out of the budget. That's why program integrity has to be at the top of the list when we talk about fiscal responsibility in Kansas and protecting the safety net. So I'll close with this. Kansans, we know, are very generous. That's where I'm from, Kansas. We know, but we're not gullible. They expect their tax dollars to be protected, and they expect assistance to go to the truly needy. This bill reinforces that trust, and I believe it deserves your support today. So glad to take any questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin, and you are the only oral proponent, so we will open it up to questions from the committee. Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for being here. My question is in regard to page 20. There's an entire section on that page in regard to Medicaid redetermination. I don't believe I heard anything in your testimony about that section. Can you tell me your thoughts about that part?
Sure. So you're referring to page 20, starting on line 20? Yes. Sure. So for that portion, we're talking about formal redeterminations of if someone is eligible or not. As it's written now in its current draft form, redeterminations for anyone applying for Medicaid, if they're going to be reapplying, they're going to do formal redeterminations quarterly as it's written in its current form. Other states, do it differently for different populations. We do know with the One Big Beautiful Bill, redeterminations have to be done at least 6 months for the expansion population, but that is not applicable in Kansas because you all have not expanded Medicaid. So there's some different changes there, but for Kansas, this is what we have for this program as its current form.
Well, then a follow-up. per federal law, there are certain populations that have extended coverage, like thinking women and children have that extra 12-month coverage period. So with this bill, though, I mean, we'd be adding more government in terms of these redetermination time periods when certain populations already have a 12-month period. So it feels like we're adding more government.
Madam Chair, thank you for your question, your comment. That's up to the committee if they would want to change the language, but redeterminations quarterly is what we have here. I will say that if you do redeterminations, it's possible to find more folks who actually aren't eligible that are in the system, and taking folks off that aren't eligible could actually clear up time and casework for managers that otherwise those folks would be on the program.
Yeah, no, thank you. Like I said, that's my concern. I mean, we have certain populations that have that coverage anyway. We would just be doing extra paperwork, extra work when their coverage is still going to be there. So can you answer one other thing for me? Can you help me understand like your definition of needy? I know that was mentioned a couple times.
Thank you. So, obviously, Medicaid eligibility, there's baseline federal requirements, but states can opt to expand Medicaid to certain populations beyond that. I would refer to Kansas's current eligibility of what is needy as far as, Medicaid or food stamps. But someone who is eligible for the program is someone that I would say is in need of the program.
Thank you.
Senator Murphy, then Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned, you talked about verification and self-attestation. Our Inspector General indicated that there were a number of people who had self-attested that they were pregnant and turned out that they were not. And I was wondering, but you sort of mentioned in the third part that pregnant women were, so I guess I'm wondering where that falls in the bill.
Yes, so thank you. For self-attestation, there are slight provisions in federal law that don't allow you to not let someone self-attest specifically for pregnancy. So to keep that in line with federal regulation, I believe that's why it's drafted that way. So there are certain exceptions of where self-attestation would be allowed, but we would present that there's really no reason for other areas that you shouldn't ban self-attestation.
Thank you.
Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So obviously this committee hears a lot of bills that are similar in spirit to this. What would your thoughts and views be on balancing, carefully measuring if the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak? And how do we consider that as Kansas right now? There's the, in the bill, there's the quarterly rechecks and all that stuff, but just what are your thoughts on kind of trying to achieve that balance?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's really, really important to make sure there's no cracks in the system. And so doing proper checks that are going to make sense, making sure that there aren't ways that someone could slip through, because every dollar we're spending on someone who is ineligible is not going to someone in need. And then I would also just point out, if Kansas, does nothing, and if there's no action taken to change anything, and the status quo is held, Kansas could be on the hook for a lot of money regarding the new federal penalties. So, for instance, just on the food stamp part, I'm sure you all have already heard about $40 million could be required from the state to pay out of your own funds for food stamps because of those new penalties. So I think it's really important that we really nail down specifically what areas we can tighten up to make sure there are no cracks in the system. And so the funds will be there to help those who really are eligible. So it's always a balancing act to make sure that we're not having too much red tape, but also not allowing folks on the program who do cost quite a bit of money for the state if they should not be on the program.
Any other questions? Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What other states have passed this legislation, and what are the dollars behind the fraud, waste, and abuse that they've been able to uncover as a result?
Sure. So there's been some big movement tied, of course, to One Big Beautiful Bill. And then even before that, I'll point out Indiana. They've passed a bill that was a wide sweeping Medicaid reform bill. It's just now being implemented this year because it was passed last year. But that's one that comes to mind. They're really taking strong measures to clean up their Medicaid program because they were going to be on the hook for billions of dollars potentially because of the new accountability measures in the One Big Beautiful Bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So no other state has done this, is what you're telling me?
Over time, there have been other states. I can point out a few if you give me a moment. Let's see, Indiana is the first one that comes to mind. But I do know Texas and Tennessee. Yes, yeah, I have it right here. Louisiana, Texas, and Tennessee, they've implemented some similar policies about tightening up eligibility, more frequent checks, and they were able to do so kind of within their existing resources they had at the administrative level, and we didn't see more costs come from that. Savings came, but not costs from the administrative side.
So thank you, Madam Chair. So is the cost that we have in the fiscal note for this bill incorrect then? Just trying to understand if this has really been done before, if we're going to be the first.
Yes, thank you for the question. I know the policies themselves I've seen here and there across states, and I'm happy to get more information for you on that. It's my understanding the bill was posted a couple weeks ago, and the fiscal note was posted last night. So our team is still reviewing that, but we would be happy to put together more information and see if there's any concerns that we would have from our standpoint with the fiscal note, and get back to you on that.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. Okay, on the fiscal note, if implemented, it's my understanding, per the fiscal note, that this would require 192 FTEs, and this would cost more than $18.5 million in 2027. So that's a lot of growing government, a lot of FTEs, a huge price tag. So you mentioned something earlier. You said something like, we want to make sure people applying don't have too much red tape. So if this is going to be such a financial burden and so many additional FTEs, the truly needy already struggle in applying for SNAP and Medicaid. So how would this bill make it easier for them and make their interactions with the system better?
Thank you for the question. As I previously mentioned, I've not dug into the fiscal note at a deep level since it was posted, I believe, last night. But I do know, without even looking at it, in the figures that you shared, Kansas is on the hook for even more than what the fiscal note figure that you shared. It could be at least ranging from $40 million on the SNAP side. Depending on what your next Medicaid error rate could be, it could range from previous PERM scores, the payment error rate scores that come out in federal audits. I did some digging into previous years. It could range from $30 million up to $780 million. So adding those figures up together, and again, if you just keep the status quo as is, 18 million would probably be less than if the state were to do nothing and be on hook for much more than $18 million in penalties. But again, happy to look at that fiscal note in more detail, and we're working on it. I know my team is, and we'll be getting a memo to you shortly.
Any other questions for the Senator Thompson?
I'm not sure who to ask on this one, but KDHE probably already has to verify income some way, correct? Do we know? And maybe our advisors or researchers know on that. Because it seems to, and my point is, or my question is, if they're already verifying income loosely without self-attestation, why is it going to cause so much extra work just providing for somebody who's applying for that to provide the data? And if they don't provide the data, why is it extra work? They don't provide the data, they're not eligible. If they can cough up the data that shows that their income makes them eligible, I don't understand the fiscal note on these extra positions that KDHE is claiming it will take, because you still have people who have to verify and sign people up for these positions. Now, I don't know if there's anybody in research that can verify. This fiscal note seems grossly exaggerated to me, Madam Chair.
We will do some looking with that. I'm going to assume that it's because, yes, they do checks, but now they will be doing them more frequently. So I think that begs the question as to how much more burdensome that will be. But we will definitely be looking at the fiscal note. As was mentioned, it just dropped, so we haven't had a chance to really dig into the numbers, but we will be looking at that and getting the committee more specific information on that. Did you care to say anything on that, Caitlin?
I believe Kansas, the agency is doing certain things, not allowing certain criteria for self-attestation. Some of those points that are in this bill would just need to be codified. That is why we're seeking codification of that full list from which factors we would not allow self-attestation.
Senator Holscher. No, that's fine. Senator
Thank you,
Holscher.
Madam Chair. You just said something there that made me think of something. So on the self-attestation, in terms of income, residency, age, things like that, how would families then provide definitive proof of some of those categories? What's that definition, I guess?
Sure. So there's lots of resources and databases that the state agency uses to verify what someone's income is. They need to show things like mailing addresses for, do you actually live here? Do you have a electric bill, from your address to show that you're a resident here? So there's data that they already have access to that would help verify when they're actually filling out the application and not just only taking their word for it.
Okay. I would think we probably already have that, but thank you.
Any other questions for the proponent? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony, Caitlin. Appreciate it. We will now move to neutral testimony, and we will begin with Christine Osterlin, Deputy Secretary of Agency Integration and Medicaid Director. Welcome to committee.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Christine Osterlin, Deputy Secretary of Agency Integration and the State Medicaid Director. Thank you for the opportunity to provide neutral testimony on Senate Bill 363. I'm actually going to start my testimony today actually talking about the fiscal note and why we did come up with 192 FTEs. So currently in Kansas, we do not accept self-attestation for income. So I do want to clarify that up from the previous questions. Actually, what we use for income, we call it a both below standard. So I'm going to do even numbers. If you put on your application that you make $1,000 and based on your household size, $1,000 is below the Medicaid threshold, that's a check mark for the good. The income match comes in. It also says that you're below the income threshold, so that would either be an Equifax match or Kansas Department of Labor. So the results we get back from them says that you're below. That's a both below standard. So we would accept that as your income is now below the Medicaid threshold. If one of them is above that threshold, then you would have to provide pay stubs, if you're self-employed, like a tax return. So income is not a part of self-attestation. What is a part of self-attestation in Kansas is we do take advantage in the federal regulations. There are categories of may accept self-attestation. We do that on residency, age, date of birth, and household size. Now, we do a reasonable check. So if you put on your application that you have 4 household members and you list them, we look at the SNAP information and it's radically different. That would not be reasonably compatible, and then we would go to requesting documentation. But our fiscal note was done on the elimination of self-attestation and what that means if we cannot self-attest to age, household, residency, and all of those have to go to verification. There is no data source that would tell us that information. There's no data source that's going to tell me what your household size is. And even if you give me an electric bill, that's going to tell me who the adult in the house is. It is not going to tell me if those children reside there. So what that does is currently today we get about 16,000 applications a month. We have a group of them that we do all these data matches and we're able to process eligibility. Those will now go to virtually 100% worker having to work that case because we'll have to get the documentation in to the agency to work those. The other place that comes into effect is as we do these quarterly data matches. I'll talk about this more a little bit later in my testimony. Right now, when we do an annual renewal, about 50% of our folks we are not able to electronically verify. So that means they go to the manual process. We're estimating with these quarterly matches that number will be less because they're more frequent, but we're estimating about 25% of our caseload will go to falling out and have to go to the manual process. And so workers, on average, it takes about 15 minutes to work each one of these. So really, it truly is just math. How many additional applications or data matches are going to fall to having to receive that verification manually times 15 minutes equals roughly 192 FTEs. The other factor that I want to say that plays into this, and you heard it referenced, is the PERM audits. One thing about PERM audits is, and it's been mentioned here in testimony in the previous years, about 2019 when Kansas's error rate on PERM was 27.54%. The reason for that is that's when the clearinghouse, and for those of you that have been in the legislature for a while, you remember this, the clearinghouse was in a massive backlog in 2017, 2018. In fact, Kansas got put on a cap by the federal government. What happens in a PERM audit is any case that you could correctly approve it, say you're eligible for Medicaid, but I did it at day 50, that's an error because it had to be done under 45 days. So as we move more items to manual processing, we have to ensure we have enough staff that we're able to process this work within the 45 days, or as was correctly testified to, when we have our next PERM audit, heaven forbid, we don't want to go back to a 27% error rate because she's absolutely correct. That would be millions of dollars the state owes. And so payment error also impacts timeliness. So part of our staffing was that when these documentations come in, we're going to have enough mailroom staff to turn those around quickly, get those into the system, get them out to workers, and enough workers to touch them so we don't have cases age beyond 45 days. Other things in our fiscal note that I'll point out, obviously there is a cost, not a lot, to create interfaces for additional data matches. I will say that we will have to have approval from CMS to do additional data matches, always a thing with Medicaid. Again, one of the questions they'll ask us is that data more reliable. I will tell you, we used to use Kansas Department of Revenue data. We found that the KDOL data is much more reliable, as well as Equifax. Again, and the reason I mention that is if CMS does not approve us to use that interface, we will not receive the enhanced match for the system changes to create that interface. If they do approve it, we get 75% match. If they don't approve it, we get 0. So the fiscal could change some. Again, we've not asked the question, so I don't have an answer. And then some of the other system costs are just around, we pay per data match. So when we use the hub, it's about $7.70 a match. So as we do more frequent matching, you will pay for every time we request data on an individual. Moving on, I won't spend a lot of time. You'll see in our written testimony the list of all the data matches that we do today. We do incarceration, we do income, we do date of death, we do social security number. We do have a Paris file that's only quarterly. It's not very reliable, and it's very outdated because states are only required to update the Paris report annually. And so they could have on that Paris report, and you will see this frequently, where they'll have the same date for every person, and that typically means they're only doing annual updates. We do have a more accurate file now that we should have added here around residency, as we started receiving in August of this year. a file from CMS that provides names to the state of Kansas where we may have members that may have multiple state Medicaid enrollment. And it's a way for us to go out and check, are they still a Kansas resident, et cetera. Moving on, around Section 2 about the data submission to CMS, I just want to indicate that for the Medicaid program, we actually submit all of our data to CMS today. I in my written testimony, kind of give you the list. I mean, it's claims, it's eligibility data, financial transactions, provider data. It's called the TMSIS data set. It's a very, very comprehensive. We've been doing that for years. Essentially, they have all of the Kansas Medicaid data already. Again, going back to Section 4, prohibiting self-attestation, a couple additional points that I will make there. We will have to have approval from CMS to implement any of that. We have to give them a verification plan. I think the one that we've kind of struggled internally the most with is household. Again, I kind of mentioned that. How do you prove who's in your household, especially if they're a minor child? You can give me a birth certificate. Does that mean they live with you? So again, don't know where CMS will fall on some of those requirements, but we can definitely ask. The other thing I will mention about self-attestation, which is a part folks do not really think about, it is not the majority of the cases, so I am saying that, but there are times that we use self-attestation to actually immediately deny an application. A good example would be, I'm an adult, I apply, I say I'm not pregnant, I'm not disabled, and I do not have a minor child. Today, I can immediately say you're denied. You do not meet any category for Kansas Medicaid eligibility. If we don't allow self-attestation on household, then I would have to request, the way the bill is written today, I would have to request that information. The other thing that I would also talk about when it comes to self-attestation is to think about our long-term care, our nursing home residents, our HCBS residents. There's no exception in the bill for some of those very vulnerable populations. And some of these additional requirements may negatively impact them. And then kind of moving on into the quarterly checks of redeterminations. So one thing that is on the Medicaid side in federal regs is that we can only do a renewal once every 12-month period. Now, we can do some data checks within that 12-month window, but a complete renewal, which is I'm completing every data check, I'm ensuring you're fully eligible for Medicaid, can happen once a year per federal regulations. We would have to work with CMS on how many data checks they would allow us to do quarterly outside of that. And what I'm kind of getting at there is I'm not sure that they would let us go as far as doing every single data check that we do at renewal every quarter, because in essence, you're completing a renewal more than the required once a year. But I know they would let us do some. So I just think there would need to be some flexibility there. The other thing that I would also mention, and it was mentioned earlier, we do have populations, children are required by federal law to have 12 months of continuous eligibility. So if I did do a quarterly renewal, I would pay for the data check. I would pay for a worker to work that case, and at the end of the day, even if they were no longer eligible for Medicaid, I could not end their eligibility because they are guaranteed per federal law 12 months of continuous eligibility. Pregnant women may receive 12 months continuous coverage. Kansas has chosen to exercise that option. So again, I have pregnant women who receive 12 months of continuous eligibility. So it would be a cost with no ability to end eligibility. The other populations that I would point out, HCBS again, and our nursing home residents, quarterly renewals for that population, they're very vulnerable. They struggle with their annual renewal. A lot of times they don't have a lot of changes in circumstances, but right now the way the bill is written, every quarter they would have to respond to requests for information in order to retain their eligibility. With that, I do have some comments in there around the retroactive, which does comply with federal law. My only comment there was if federal law ever changes, we have that right now in our CHIP statute where the federal law changed and we were very specific in our CHIP statute of mirroring federal law. Now the two don't match. So there is always that risk, but we would be doing that regardless of the bill or not. And with that, Chair, Chairman, I'll close my testimony and stand for questions.
Thank you. And if we could go ahead and have Dr. Carla Whiteside Hicks testify, then we will open it up for questions for our neutral conferees. So Dr. Whiteside Hicks, Director of ESS, Department of Children and Families. Welcome.
Morning, Chair and Committee. Thank you for having me here today. I'm trying to, you surprised me. Get my notes together here. All right. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to provide neutral testimony for Senate Bill 363. I do want to start with saying that DCF absolutely agrees that accurate determination of eligibility and benefit levels is critical for the federal programs we oversee. With that, I want to echo what my colleague from KDHE said in terms of self-attestation for income. DCF does not allow self-attestation for income in determining eligibility. If you are applying for SNAP, for TANF, for childcare, we require the most recent 30 days of income. So that can be check stubs, that can be any other data source that we can identify, but we absolutely do not accept self-attestation for that. I want to go through some of the things from the bill. First of all, the checking with Office of Vital Statistics on a monthly basis for death records. We already have an interface. We do get that information, and we get it more than monthly. We get a daily interface that would identify individuals who are deceased. I will say, however, because you may hear some people say that there are individuals who are deceased who continue to get SNAP. That is possible. If someone received their SNAP benefit on the 3rd of February and that person died on the 9th of February, they've already received their SNAP benefit for that month, and we don't go back and recoup those funds. So it is possible that someone who is deceased would get those dollars, but we will close their case the end of February so that they would not get March benefits. Another part of the bill discusses on a quarterly basis getting information from Kansas Department of Labor, such as changes in employment. My concern with that one is that we do also have access to that information, and my understanding is that employers report to Department of Labor quarterly. So reviewing that information more often is not going to help us. We already check that information at application, at interim report, at review, so that it would not be a major change for us, but it could create some additional work for our staff. And then on a monthly basis, potential changes to residency. Do want to be clear that continuous residency in the state is not required for SNAP. It is required for TANF, it is required for childcare. It is not a requirement for SNAP. An individual cannot receive duplicate benefits. I cannot receive SNAP benefits in Kansas for February and also in Missouri for February. But I can move to Missouri and still receive my benefits in Kansas. But when I report that I have moved, which I should be reporting, then my case in Kansas will close and my case would have to be opened in the state of Missouri. But that is not something that we flag. We do actually investigate incidences of those, for example, with EBT usage. So if we notice that someone is consistently using an EBT card out of state, we already reach out to that household to ask, did you move? Are you visiting? Why are we seeing these out of state usages with your EBT card? From Department of Revenue, the quarterly basis, we currently do not have an agreement with the Department of Revenue to be able to use their data. And this is our process. What we would do with any other interface we are considering is we are looking at the data that interface would provide to us, and then we determine what gap that fills. Are we already getting this data from somewhere else? Is this data even relevant to eligibility determination? And once we determine that we really can get needed information from this new data source, then we would pursue a data sharing agreement and going through the cost of the interface with our eligibility determination system. On a monthly basis, from Department of Corrections, we already get updates from Department of Corrections, and we make those changes. So when we know that someone is incarcerated, we already go into our system and we remove them from the case, or if it's a one-person household, then we would close their food assistance case. Again, from Department of Labor, you know, as I said, there's a semi-monthly basis requirement for getting information from Department of Labor. And as I said, because employers report that data quarterly, it's unnecessary for us to go back in and check that information again, or more than quarterly, because no new information will be there. And that's just an added burden for our eligibility teams.
Dr. Whiteside Hicks, I apologize, but we have about 5 minutes left. Just so you know, we do have a hard stop at 10:25.
Okay, absolutely. The gambling winnings, I will say we are currently our cap is at $5,000. It is very easy for us to change that to $3,000. That is not a difficult task for us at all. Our main concern is that with many of these data sources, Food and Nutrition Services considers it unclear information. So even when I get a death match, we cannot just go into the system and automatically close that case for that individual. We have to have some secondary verification that that person truly is deceased before we can take case action. So some of the additional data checks will require additional staff time, additional mailing costs, because now we have to reach out to the clients more often to get that information. And then we also risk noncompliance. I do want to mention that it can increase application processing timeliness, which is a federal standard, and we can be sanctioned for that if we are not processing applications in a timely manner. And then also remember that because we have a combined eligibility determination system, any system changes the cost for that would be cost allocated with TANF, SNAP, and child care. So if we're impacting SNAP, it is also going to increase costs for those other programs. And I believe you have you have the written testimony. I will also point out there are some other states that have similar processes where they are verifying information more often than we do. They are not simplified reporters, such as Iowa, Michigan, Maine, and their error rates are much higher than ours are because of that increased those increased touches on the cases. It takes a solid 12 months for an eligibility worker to become fully trained. So the more we change the processes, the more we introduce some opportunities for errors. And I will stop there and stand for questions.
Thank you, appreciate it. We have time for a couple of quick questions. Senator Thompson and then Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Doctor. Quick question to remind me about how many do we have on SNAP benefits in Kansas? I know it probably varies from month to month, but
it does vary.
Average.
We average about 188,000 Kansans per month.
188,000 per month. And then how many FTEs do we already have dedicated toward determining eligibility?
So we have about, determining eligibility alone, we have, I believe, 463 FTEs right now. And of those, about 308 are filled.
Okay, so 308 out of 416. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for being here. The conferee earlier from FGA indicated that we need to get our error rates down. Can you help me see is there anything in this bill that helps us reduce those error rates?
There is nothing in this bill that helps us reduce the error rate. Honestly, I believe that it would increase our error rate because of the additional staff time.
Seeing no other questions, thank you again for being here. Thank you to all of our conferees. I will draw the committee's attention to neutral written only from Andrew Brown, Deputy Secretary for Programs at the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability. With that, committee, we will hear opponent testimony on this bill tomorrow, so we will recess this hearing until tomorrow, Wednesday at 9:30. We are adjourned.